Hi everyone, my name is Alicia and welcome to my channel. Today I will be going through the mid-year freakout tag, and this consists of 13 questions that will give you a little bit of insight into how my reading journey has gone so far this year. In the description box down below, I will also put in all the questions if you wanted to participate and answer these as well. I would love to see what books you are enjoying so far this year. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So the first question is the best book that you have read so far this year. Now, I have actually been really loving a lot of the books that I have been reading. So initially I thought I would just let you know what my 5 stars are, but I've actually had quite a few 5 stars. So I've decided to narrow it down to these 4 books. The first book I want to talk about is The Poet Empress by Chantal. This is a dark fantasy standalone. Now, this does have some trigger warnings, so please make sure to do your research before you jump into this book. Now, what I loved about this book a lot was that you see female strength in a completely different way, where it's not physical strength, but strength of the mind and the heart. And I feel like that's something that we don't really see too lot in fantasy or romantasy books these days, where most of the time it's either the female main character has got a training arc, they've got a hidden power, they're the chosen one. But Wei, who is the female main character of this book, she's just an ordinary person from a impoverished village, just trying to get by. And when the prince of this kingdom is looking for concubines, she puts her hand up and, tries to make her way there. And what I loved about this is, since Wei does not have a noble or royalty type background, she is diving into a world that she's very unfamiliar with. And the way that she needs to navigate this world, where everything that she says, every move that she makes will be the difference between surviving another day or taking her last breath. And everything she did was very high stakes. I loved watching the way how she was able to navigate such a delicate situation with such grace, and the way that she uses her mind and her wit to kind of get by was truly incredible. And I thought the way that Chantal concluded this book was a very strong statement, not only to fantasy, but also female characters in fantasy as well. And she also proves that you can write an incredible standalone with a compelling plot and amazing characters and not have a very long series. I'm still absolutely flabbergasted that this is her debut novel. The next book I want to talk about is Morningstar by Pierce Brown. This is book 3 in the Red Rising saga, and this is a sci-fi dystopian space opera. And book 3 in particular, I love the way how Pierce Brown was able to pull so many emotions out of me. Like every human emotion that you can possibly feel, I felt in this book. And this is one of those books where it reminds me why I absolutely love reading. For an author to be able to bring all these emotions out of you, to make you feel so strongly about these characters, where you're not just an outsider looking in, you feel like you are standing side by side along with them. And it's something, I can't remember where I heard this from, but they say, while you love your family, when you have friends that you experience a lot of things with, you have such a deep connection with them. And I feel like Pierce Brown has really done that in spades, where I feel so connected to these characters and their story and their journey, and I really want them to succeed. Now, there was a point in this book where Pierce Brown really broke me as a person, and the way that he did that was so incredible, because when he broke me and then all the subsequent events that happened after, I just felt this heavy weight on my shoulders, just getting heavier and heavier. And I truly saw no light at the end of the tunnel. I could see no happiness for the characters that I loved. And I have never felt that level of hopelessness and despair in my life. And I am normally a very optimistic person. So for me to feel such sadness and such dread was so incredible that this author pulled it out of me. And the way that this book concluded was incredible. And after I finished this book, I had to kind of just sit down with it for a bit and to really process it. It's one of the most incredible things about reading and being a reader, and I highly recommend this series with my whole chest. The next book I want to talk about is Bratva Bride by TJ Maguire, and this is a dark romance mafia book, and I absolutely loved this. I highly recommend, if you do want to read this series, to listen to it as audiobooks. I think that is the best way to kind of tackle this series, and it is truly incredible the way that both of the narrators really bring the characters to life. And I found myself like laughing out loud, giggling like so much while I was listening to this book. So in this book, we are following a Bratva family, which is highly prominent within the mob crime syndicate world. And in this first novel, we follow the youngest child out of 4 siblings, which is the only female out of all the siblings, called Ileana. And she is such an incredible character. I love her so much. Like, her personality, how unhinged she can be, and just the way how she interacts with her siblings is so exciting. Because she is the youngest, she also is everyone's favorite. And I love how she has different relationships with each of her brothers. Honestly, one of my most favorite things about the book and the entire series so far is the way how each of the siblings love and interact with each other. I love all the chaos between all the siblings, and I would love to honestly read a book just about all the shenanigans they put each other through. And I really connected with a lot of the sibling tips that you would have. They are very true to what it's like to kind of have a sibling, although it's kind of notched up quite a bit because they all are a little bit unhinged. Now, in this book, Liliana is entering into a marriage of convenience with a different mafia family. I believe they are Italian, if I'm not mistaken. A marriage with Arturo, who is the oldest son of this other family. And within the mafia world, the best way for connections is via marriage, because they are very sacred. And they are the combining of 2 families, 2 resources, and power. And what I loved about this book is it doesn't just focus on the romance between our 2 characters. There actually is quite an incredible overarching plot throughout this book. And our characters don't actually get together until like right at the very end of the book. So I really love all the moments where they are together. A lot of the tension, the banter between them is so tangible and exciting that, you know, once they finally get together towards the end of the book, it feels so satisfying and rewarding. So it is quite a bit of a slow burn to a degree, and I absolutely loved every moment of it. And the last book I want to talk about is Holding the Reins by Paisley Hope. This is a small town Western cowboy romance, and I absolutely loved this book. And what I really loved about this book the most is how it shows grief, loss, and family. And that really touched me a lot because I am unfortunately someone who has experienced a lot of grief and loss in their life. I have lost many close family members, unfortunately, especially to illness. So this book really touched me in a way that I wasn't expecting. In this book, we follow Cece, who unfortunately lost her father. The way how the family deal with grief, how she deals with grief. And while it shows like the feelings, how you are when you experience losing someone, but what I loved about this book is it makes you remember that person in a happy light, where you really remember a lot of the great times you had with this person, a lot of the little quirks that they had. The family aspect about this and how the family comes together, feel like you are part of this family, you are part of this world. And I felt such comfort being in this household with all these people. And that's what really had my heart with this book. Now, we follow Nash, who is the male main character in this book, and the relationship that he develops with Cece is really lovely. And I like how he is someone who always shows up for this family, and he shows that through his actions and not just his words. Like, he is there when you need him, he is there for help, he is there for support. And I truly loved that. And combining that together with how homey this book felt was really lovely. And this book, it is quite spicy, I'm not going to lie, but in general, like, I really truly loved this overall. The message, the relationships all within this book, they really truly touched me in a way that I was not expecting at all. And question number 2 is the best sequel you have read so far this year, and I've got 3 to talk about. The first one I want to talk about is Gods and Men by Christopher Hopper and J.N. Chaney. And this is the second book in the Ruins of the Earth series. And this was the book series that made me fall in love with sci-fi. This is a sci-fi military fiction series, and I highly recommend listening to the audiobooks for these, which is the way that I have consumed the entire series so far. There is only one narrator. Now, the narrator does change, I think, after book 4, and it's still a single narrator, just a different person. But regardless, to have one narrator narrating all these different characters and giving them all a very distinct voice was amazing. I actually had to double check that it was only one narrator. Like, the skills of this narrator are truly incredible. And in this second book specifically, we are no longer in Earth. We are actually within the alien world, and we get to really see how the world opens up in this book, where we really understand the alien customs, how they operate, their culture, why they took the humans from the first book in the first place, your experience and how everything is so foreign, and just like all the scenarios that they get themselves into was really exciting, but also very grim when you see like what happens to all the humans that were taken in the first book. So I highly recommend this series. It is the series that made me fall in love with sci-fi. I have not seen a single person talk about this series, and I'm hoping that this introduces more people to the series and we can talk about how incredible it is. Now, the second best sequel I want to talk about is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, which is the second book in the Red Rising saga. This book is what solidified this series as basically one of my favorite series of all time. This book is fast-paced, it is intense, there is so much battles, so many reveals, so many situations, so many character situations, character development. Everything about this book was so incredible, and I typically like to read like before I go to bed, and anytime when I read this book before I went to bed, the amount of adrenaline that was coursing through my veins while reading this, I literally couldn't sleep after. Like, I needed to know what happened next. And the last sequel I wanted to quickly talk about was The Bratva Butchered by T.J. Maguire, which is book 4 in the Bratva series. And the reason why I specifically wanted to talk about this one was the themes of this book, where we follow the dad in the family. I always love when you're following a series and it's either about the parent or the parent's story. And in this one, it's about the dad. Now, in this series, unfortunately, the dad has lost his wife. What I loved about this book quite a lot is the struggle of losing a significant partner and then finding it in yourself to love again. And I think that's something that I haven't seen a lot, at least in my reading journey so far, where you have a lot of guilt and struggle with understanding or like coping with losing a person and wanting to stay true to them, that you loved them, you took your vows with this person, but then you have feelings for someone else that you have met, and a lot of the struggle with giving yourself permission to find love again. And I loved that message that I had within this book, and it really did touch me. And this is true enemies to lovers, because both of these characters have tried to unalive each other multiple times throughout this book. So I really loved the dynamic and the tension between them, and also the banter between them as well. It was a very enjoyable listen. The next question, number 3. New releases that you haven't read but you want to. The first one I wanted to show was Aisha by Soraya Boazoui. I hope I pronounced that right. This sounds really exciting. This is a fantasy standalone based on, I believe, Moroccan mythology. And just the concept of this sounds really interesting, because in a lot of fantasy these days, they are typically more Western based. So anything that is out of that, where it's a different culture that we get to experience and their take on fantasy and what fantasy looks like in their world, is super interesting to me, and I'm super excited to dive into this one. The next new release that I want to talk about is Japanese Gothic by Kylie Lee Baker. This is a horror novel, and all I know about this book is that we are following two different characters in two different timelines, and they eventually converge. It looks really interesting. I loved all the artwork that I saw in here, so it's making me really excited to pick this one up. I have seen a couple of instances where people either really like this, they don't like it, they think it's kind of mid. I'm very curious to see like what my take on this is. The next new release that I want to talk about is A Forsaken Prophecy by Stacey McEwen. This is book 2 in the Artisan trilogy. If I was to explain this book, I would say this is Peaky Blinders with a touch of fantasy. I love this series. It is so compelling, and it was so different from anything that I've ever read before, and that's what made it so interesting and made me fly through the first book. So I'm very excited to dive into this one and see where our characters left off from the end of the first book. And the last new release that I quickly want to talk about is A Dance of Burning Blades by M.H. Ayunde. I hope I pronounced that right. This is an epic fantasy, and this is book 2 in the Invoker trilogy. It truly is a very good blend between fantasy and sci-fi elements. And what I also really loved about it was it's not the typical Western epic fantasies that you see. This world is based on African culture. And it was really interesting to see how that was woven into the story and into their everyday lives, and also into the magic system. Now, the magic system in this book is truly incredible and unique, and something I have never encountered before. Essentially, you have 9 different clans who have the ability to call upon their ancestors to help them fight in battle alongside with them, which is what you can see here. This person has invoked someone, and this is kind of what it looks like. We are following many different characters and their perspectives within this book. We encounter one character who comes across an ancestor that is incredibly powerful, that will change the tide of the war that is currently going on within this series. But you may also encounter an evil spirit that does not have great intentions and wants to cause havoc to the people of this world. And all the perspectives that we follow within this series really shows how expansive this world is, and how each of their stories are interwoven and interconnected together, and how they converge. I am so surprised at how much I enjoyed this, that I did get the second book, and they are very thick. They are epic fantasy, but I am super excited to dive into this one to see how our characters continue on in all of their journeys. Now, question number 4 is anticipated releases for the second half of the year. The first book I want to talk about is Sunsplitter by S.A. McLean. This is the final book in the duology for Beasts of the Void. So this book is a really good mixture of fantasy and sci-fi mixed in with monster romance, to say the least. In this book series, we follow Fee, who is a smuggler. And the reason she does that is because she wants her village to be self-sufficient. Because anytime when a village is in need of resources or anything, they need to go to the immortal being that watches over their city. And if you want something from your immortal being, you need to provide a blood sacrifice, because these immortal beings eat humans. And along the way, a lot of things happen, and they do have a little bit of a budding romance together. And I'm really excited to jump into the second book to see how the book and the series concludes. The next book I'm excited about is The King of the Fairy by Cassandra Clare. Anything that Cassandra Clare writes, I will read it. Cassandra Clare is one of my favorite authors, and that's pretty much all I need to say about it. And of course, just like I'm sure with a lot of other people, 2 other new releases that I am excited for is the next book in the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas, and also the novella that's coming up in the Empyrean universe by Rebecca Yarros. So I'm very excited for both of those as well. So question number 5 is biggest disappointments. Now, I have 2 that I want to talk about, and I disliked them both for the exact same reasons, even though they are 2 completely different genres. The first one I want to talk about is My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney. This is a mystery thriller type book. and this is very highly rated in the book community, but I think I might be in the minority with this one, where I gave this book 2 stars. I borrowed this book from my library as an audiobook. I think the audiobook is actually fantastic. It's a very fun listen. It's definitely very messy, but I think that's kind of what made it somewhat entertaining, even though overall I really didn't like the book. At the start of this book, I was very much interested. I was immediately hooked, where a woman goes for a morning walk. When she comes back to the door, she finds her key doesn't open the door, and her husband is saying, "Who are you? This is my wife," and another woman is saying that she is her. So immediately hooked. I was very interested to see like where this book would go. Now, when I got to the end of this book, I was thoroughly disappointed that this was the big twist ending that everyone was upping and raving about. Because for me personally, I thought it was a big slap in the face to the reader. I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, so I'm just going to quickly put a spoiler disclaimer here. I'll put a timestamp somewhere if you want to just quickly skip this small part. The big twist is an unreliable narrator told from first person point of view. And I absolutely despised that, because you are following this character's point of view. You are listening to their thoughts. You are listening to their feelings. You are understanding how the character reacts to certain situations. They are essentially just lying to you the whole time, that when you find out the twist, a lot of the things that happened earlier in the book make absolutely no sense whatsoever, and I absolutely hated it. Now, the reason why I gave this book a 2-star instead of a 1-star was because the book was entertaining as it is. It was very messy, very dramatic, where it did want you to, where anytime when it gave you a plot twist or something crazy happened, you wanted to find out more. So I felt like the listening experience throughout the course of the book was entertaining. I just hated the overall conclusion of the book. So that's why I gave it 2 stars instead of a 1-star. And my second disappointment of the year so far is How Does It Feel by Janine O'Reilly. Now, this book might sound a little bit familiar if you watched my TBR video up here. I put this as a book that I'm super excited to read because it's very highly rated. I unfortunately gave this book a 1-star. Straight out. As soon as I finished it, the visceral anger that I felt after finishing this book was very strong, that immediately I was like, this is a 1-star book. And that truly sucks, because I have the most beautiful edition of this book. This is a dark fantasy with fae. It was a bit slow, I'm not going to lie, but I guess to kind of understand the characters, we kind of had to see how what their life is like, a little bit about them before we dive into the next part of the plot. I did find it a bit slow, but what I really didn't like was the writing and how the female main character was always described as incredibly beautiful with blonde hair, curvaceous body, everyone wants her, and it was always repeated a lot throughout this book, and I found it very incredibly annoying. But when this turned from enemies into lovers, I guess, it was such a flip of a switch where it made absolutely no sense how he was suddenly super obsessed with her. There was nothing within the build of both of these characters' relationship that he was head over heels obsessed with her. I actually had to backtrack a couple of pages or a couple of chapters just to make sure that I read that right, because I really didn't understand how he fell in love so quickly. Quick spoiler alert if you don't want to know about this. What's really interesting is this book ends the exact same as My Husband's Wife by Alex Feeney. We are following a character where we are inside their head. We are, getting to know their feelings, how they react to certain situations. And basically the character is lying to you the whole time. And I just really didn't like it. And that was the big twist that everyone was so crazy about. And it made so many things that this character said, this character did, this character reacted, made absolutely no sense if you think about what happened throughout the course of this book. And I'm sorry. If you loved this book, I'm so glad you did. I just personally don't like this type of ending. Question 6 is biggest surprise. Now, I had 3 big surprises. Now, the first book I want to talk about is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and this is a non-fiction book, I know. But one of my reading goals this year was to expand my genres in reading, and I had to at least read one non-fiction book this year, and I chose a memoir for this one. And I think a memoir was the best way to actually dive into nonfiction because I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars, and I listened to this as an audiobook from my library, and the author herself narrates the book, and I thought that gave it a really nice personal touch and made me enjoy my experience overall with this book. It was very interesting to see the life behind a movie star, especially a child star, like how the auditions work, what the environment is like for these child stars, and her relationship with her family, in particular her mother, and how toxic her relationship with her actually was, and then coming to that realization much later on in life when it came to her realizations about the relationship that she had with her mother. And she does actively talk about her going through therapy in this book. It actually shows you how difficult therapy can be for a person, especially when it comes to things that are very confronting. I was truly surprised by how much I enjoyed this. So definitely a big surprise with this one. And surprisingly enough, this is actually opening me up to wanting to potentially read or listen to more nonfiction in my reading journey. Very big surprise. And the next book that absolutely surprised me was You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. So this is a standalone horror novel, and the reason why I wanted to put this in this section specifically was because of the impact that this book had on me long after I've read it. Now, I highly suggest that you do your research and look into the triggers of this book, because the triggers in this book are very, very extensive. That, for me personally as well, I did find this quite a challenging read. So definitely check that out because your mental health is very important. Now, this book, we follow a character called Crane, who is a transgender man. Crane follows what is called the Hive. Now, the Hive is basically a culmination of flies, worms, and maggots all congealed into a sentient type being that is known as the Hive. I know that sounds really weird, but stick with me on this one. And the reason why the Hive is like a faceless type of thing was because of the metaphor that it really does portray. This has a lot of metaphors, a lot of themes that are very tough, but are things that do need to be talked about. And along the way, Crane unfortunately does get pregnant and he wants to have an abortion. And obviously, since abortion is illegal in this world, he's going to try and do it on the down low. But the Hive said, no, you are not aborting this baby. You will have this baby and you will give birth to said baby. And Crane, being the person that he is, follows what the Hive is saying. But the turmoil and struggle that he faces was very difficult to read. I'm not going to lie. It was very challenging and very confronting to read. And it's definitely a different take on body horror. This person, Crane, who transitioned into a man, now seeing his body change back into a woman as his pregnancy progresses. Really, really quite interesting, where even though I was disturbed, with what was happening, I was still very compelled, where I wanted to know more. I wanted to see how this would conclude, how this character will see themselves on the other side. A book that really does talk about bodily autonomy, mental health, and, being happy with who you are as a person and being the person who you are always meant to be. Andrew is a transgender male himself, and you can see that in this book, he was able to put a lot of himself into this, a lot of his own struggles that made the character Crane so authentic and so raw. And it wasn't sanitized at all. It was very straight up, very blunt about it, their thoughts and feelings on things. And it is confronting and challenging. But I love a book that does challenge me. And the way how all of those themes tie into the title, You Weren't Meant to Be Human, really does emphasize a lot of what this book is trying to say. I think the social commentary in this was quite brilliantly done. And my last surprise that I wanted to talk about was Starside by Alex Astor. Now, the reason why this is on my biggest surprise was because I have read Light Lark by this author. I've only read the first book in that series. I never continued with it. This book I enjoyed so much more. I gave this 4 stars. And it's really interesting to see, reading from the same author, how her craft has developed over time, where she went from writing YA to now writing this adult book that I thoroughly enjoyed. Immediately when you start this book, it is fast-paced and absolutely brutal. I was not expecting the brutality in this book from the get-go, and that immediately hooked me and sucked me into this world. I really enjoyed all the encounters that we follow our characters in. And the thing about this, though, why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5, was because there was a point in this book where I felt a bit of a lull, where it was very fast-paced, but then at one point it started to be a bit formulaic, where they go to a new area, have an encounter, resolve the encounter, and then move on to the next section. So while each encounter, like by itself, was really interesting, I really enjoyed each encounter, it did start to feel a little bit repetitive after a while. So I did find myself going into a little bit of a lull where I was curious to see where this would pick up. Now, this book is very much a slow burn. Like, our characters do not get together until literally the last 2 chapters or so of this book. So this is truly a slow burn. And I think it does enemies to lovers quite true in this, where the 2 main characters absolutely despise each other. But each encounter that they face together, that they overcome together, they start to get to know each other a little bit better over this time. And there is tension between them. And those moments of tension were so delicious, and they were so few and far in between, that when we get them, it was like little nuggets to keep you on your toes. That when the characters do finally get together in the end, it's so earned. And the way that this book concluded, I have to say, I did not see it coming. Thoroughly enjoyed that. It made me super excited to read the next book in the series. So 7 is favorite authors that are new to me. I feel like over the course of this video, you might kind of have an inkling about who they are. So the first ones I want to talk about are Christopher Hopper and J.N. Chaney, who, wrote one of my favorite sci-fi series that got me into sci-fi. Also, Pierce Brown, definitely. His Red Rising series is absolutely god tier to me now, and I'm only 3 books in, and that is saying something. Absolutely love that. And also T.J. Maguire, who wrote the Bratva series. Absolutely love this series so much. And the last author that I'm going to put in here is Shen Tao. Now, even though Shen Tao wrote only 1 book, which was The Poet Empress, I loved that story so much that I'm honestly excited to see what other books that she will write in the future. So question number 8 is newest fictional crushes. And I'm not gonna lie, this was a little bit challenging for me. I had to really think super hard about this one. When I first saw this question, from the top of my head, I was like all the men in the Bratva series. But if I was to also pick up the characters, I would say the first book that I read this year, which was Love Light Farm by B.K. Borison. I borrowed this from my library as an audiobook, and the male main character, Luca, was an absolute sweetheart. Like, he is a fantastic book boyfriend if I've ever seen one. He is so sweet. He is always there for her. He is someone that you know that you can count on. And I really loved when he was on the page and we got to read about him. So I would put him as one of the characters that I would say is a new favorite crush. And another one that I'm going to put on here is Nash from Holding the Reins. I absolutely loved his character, and again, how he really shows up in the story for not only Cece, but also for the family in general. I absolutely loved his character, and I would say that he is also another fictional crush for me. 9 is newest favorite characters. This was quite difficult, so I kind of narrowed it down to 3. Number 1 is Wei from The Poet Empress. I would even argue that Wei is one of my favorite female main characters in any fantasy book that I have read. Number 2 is Severo from the Red Rising series. Now, what's really interesting about Severo is when you first meet him in the first Red Rising book, absolutely did not like him. I thought he was an asshole. I thought he was rude. I didn't like him at all. But over the course of the first book, he eventually became one of my favorite characters by the end of the book. And the way how I did a complete 180 on that is truly incredible. And over the course of the series, after finishing book 3, I would say Severo is my absolute favorite character in the entire series so far. And the third favorite character is Ileana, which is the female main character in The Bratva Bride. I just found her so fun. She is a very big personality. I love her unhinged attitude. I love how fiery she is. And she was just so fun to follow and to see her journey. So absolutely loved her as well. Question number 10, books that made me cry. I actually surprisingly had a few. And the first book I'm going to quickly mention is Morning Star by Pierce Brown. Obviously, I talked about this book earlier in the video, so I'm not going to touch too much on it. But basically, this book made me cry quite a lot. Like, I actually had to stop reading at some points to just have a good cry because of what happened in this book. And I didn't cry just once. I cried multiple times in this book. Another book that made me cry was book 3 in the Bratva series, which is The Bratva Night. I was not expecting to cry in this book, let alone multiple times within this book. And I don't want to say why I cried because it would be big spoilers for this book. But let's just say that there are 2 characters within this series where there is obvious tension between them. And this book, you find out why. And my heart absolutely broke for both of them. I cried quite a lot in this book and I was not expecting it at all. And the other 2 books I want to talk about are 2 books in the Ruins of the Earth series, which is the sci-fi series I mentioned earlier. And the 2 books are Valley of the Dead and Fire and Fury. I was not expecting to get emotional into these 2 books as I did. And obviously, because these books are so far into the series, I can't even explain to you why I was so upset in both of these books where I did actually cry and get emotional. And that's all I'm going to say on that without spoiling anything. So let's move on to the next question. 11, books that made me happy. And you know what was really funny? I actually had a difficult time with choosing books for this one because a lot of the books that I have read this year are actually quite dark and quite dystopian. So I had to really think what was a book that made me feel happy and that I really enjoyed reading. And I've got 2. The first one is the first book, Love Light Farms in the Love Light series by B.K. Borison. And this was my first book that I read this year. And I thought this was such a great book starting the year with. It was a good, feel-good, seasonal type of read. And it was just what I needed to start off my reading year with a bang. And the second book that made me very happy was Fan Service by Rosie Dannon. This is a paranormal standalone romance. And this was such a fun read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the reason why I enjoyed it so much was because I saw a lot of myself in this book. Now, if you are someone who also loved the TV show Teen Wolf, I think you would absolutely love this book. Imagine being a teenager obsessed with a show that later on the main character of said show turns into a werewolf, and because you're obsessed with it and you know all the lore, they have to come to you for help and you have a budding romance. I loved the concept of this. It was so fun. So question number 12 is the most beautiful books that you have bought this year. And I thought this was a great way to show you some of my favorite special edition books from each of the subscriptions that I have. So I'm going to show you 3 different books. So from Bookish and Spice, my favorite edition is Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. This is such a stunning edition. So this is the front, we've got the spine, and we've got the back. Here are the sprayed edges, bottom, and the top. Here is the hardback. Here is the end paper art for the front. This is the end paper art for the back. Now from Fairy Loot, my favorite book design is actually this one right here, which is The Wicked Sea by Jordan Stephanie Gray. I think this is such a stunning cover and I absolutely love the designs and the color palette of this book. So it wraps around to the other side. We've got beautiful sprayed edges on this book. Here is the hardcover. Here is the end pages for the front. Here are the end pages for the back. Now, my favorite edition from Illumicrate, this one was a bit more challenging. And the reason for that is because there are two and I couldn't decide between one or the other, so I'm just going to put them both in. So the first one is The Poet Empress by Shen Tao. This cover is so incredibly beautiful. And the sprayed edges on this, like my jaw was on the floor when I opened this up. Here is the hardback design. Here is the end pages for the front. Here are the end pages for the back. And the second Illumicrate book that I really like is this one right here, and that is Bloodbound by Ellis Hunter. And these are two authors that have co-wrote this book together. And I think this book is incredibly stunning. Like, I love the way how this design wraps around to the end. We've got beautiful sprayed edges here. Even though it's plain top and bottom, I think this design is quite striking. Here is the hardcover design. Here is the end paper art for the front. Here is the end paper art for the back. And what I really love about this book in particular is there is extra artwork inside the book. And there is this one. Now, I do have unboxing videos of all these pretty books, so I will put links in the description down below so you can go check it out, where I go into more details about my thoughts behind each of the designs. And the last question for this book tag is books that you need to read by the end of the year. Quite frankly, all of the unread books on my TBR qualify for this question, but if I am talking out about priority reads that I want to get to, I have a couple that I do want to touch on. Now, the first books I don't think will be a surprise to anybody, but that is basically the next three books in the Red Rising saga, books 4, 5, and 6. I really do want to get to these. Now, they are all very thick books, so I really do hope I can get to these by the end of the year. Now, the next book series is a duology that I really want to read, and I have been putting it off for such a long time. I honestly can't tell you why. And that is the Shepherd King duology. So, One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. I have not read a book by her before, but this is such a loved series among the book community, especially for those who love fantasy. Now, another series that I want to start and complete this year is the Ashes of Desma series. I got these beautiful hardback editions from Big W. So I pre-ordered each of these books, but I haven't picked them up yet. And the last series I want to get to is one that I have been putting off for quite a while as well. And that is the Powerless series. Honestly, I kind of bought this as like just a hardcover buy, if I'm being honest. And yes, I did buy the series without reading the first one first, which I'm kind of really concerned about, because if I don't like the first one, I've got like 3 other books in this series to complete. So I really need to start this, get to it, see if I like it. So I'm hoping that I will eventually get to those series and finish them this year. Fingers crossed I can, but I am a big mood reader, so we will see how that goes. I feel like I've been sitting here for such a long time just yapping about books. I've really enjoyed this, but it's also still very foreign and strange to me to be talking to a camera this whole time. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm really curious to see if there were any books here that you've never heard of before that you are really interested to try. Please let me know in the comments down below. Please also like this video and be sure to subscribe so you can be notified of more content like this. Until the next one, bye!